Well, when it comes to life and ministry, one of the best things you can do is be proactive with your time and your boundaries and what you do instead of reactive. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 7 proactive boundaries you should set up in your life to have a healthy life and a healthy ministry.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. My name is Brian Androsian, and with me is Dylan Dodson. And today we're going to give you 7 things in your life that need proactive boundaries.
And this episode today is brought to you by Ambassadors Ministries. We've talked about them in the last couple episodes. A lot of times when it comes to support raising, we think it's only for like the lead pastor. But as we've also talked many times on the podcast, wouldn't it be great if you could have a larger staff or more help for other people on staff to raise support? We've had many staff members, really all of our staff members at one time or another, have raised personal support. And so Ambassadors Ministries helps you do that. They help you train people to raise support on staff, whether that's full-time, part-time, or for supplemental salary. And it is no cost to your church. They also run the fundraising as well. Yeah. We've also run our own fundraising and then run it through a third party. And we'd also found third party makes it much better as well. And so check out ambassadorsministries.com/practical. So that's ambassadors plural, ambassadorsministries.com /practical, or click out in the show notes and they'll take you a link right there. And they can you can learn more about them and they can show you how you can get more help on your church staff with helping people raise support. And yeah, just highly recommend going that route. I think many times people don't realize, it's not just for the lead pastor, but other people can do it as well, and they'll help coach you through that process.
Yep, it's really hard, to, especially from day one, to kind of think about how you're going to bridge the gap from just you to staff members. And so this is the way to bridge that gap until you can afford to pay people out of your own pocket.
Yep, so go for it. ambassadorsministries.com/practical. We would highly recommend.
Yep.
Now today we're going to talk about 7 things in your life that need proactive boundaries. There's many things in life where if we don't do something about it, it doesn't happen, or the negative things happen. Whereas if you take it really doesn't take that much time to kind of think through some of these things and put them in place, and then it makes saying yes and no to things a lot easier, and it just makes doing things that you want to do easier because you've thought about them instead of reacted to them.
Yeah.
And then particularly in ministry, there's some certain things that we kind of think are fine, but then often aren't fine if we haven't thought about them ahead of time.
Yeah.
So those are the 7 things we're going to talk about in this episode. The first one may not be a surprise, but we're going to talk about porn or inappropriate viewing or whatever things you want to lump in that category.
Yep.
A lot of times it's like, well, it's not a problem for me, or it's not a problem for me right now, which will always translate that it will be a problem for you at some point. Because in our culture today, like it's not something that you don't have to seek it out, an ad on your phone or a thing on TV. Like there's so many things that happen in our day and age that even if you're not seeking it out, can very quickly lead you down the road of doing or things that you might not want to do.
Yep.
And particularly in ministry, a lot of times you talk to people and it's like, well, it's not a problem for me. And one of the ways I like to rephrase this is this can always be a problem. And the only way to keep it not to be a problem is to have proactive things in your life. Now, this is all like, you can do whatever you want. I just think the answer is, I just don't look at these things. It's not a good one.
Yes.
Especially, in ministry and culture today, like it's going to happen if you just rely on self-will. And so oftentimes it is not self-will that gets you through things. It's the avoidance of temptation. And so we want to avoid temptation. So there's lots of different things you could do. I mean, there's like, I'll just briefly talk about some of the things I do and then we can, talk about other things that we can do with this. Like for me, I have Covenant Eyes, which it tracks what you look at. It sends a report to whoever you want to send it to. It's probably not the best thing in the world. I'm not really a tech-savvy guy, and so I haven't really ever tried to find ways around it. But just the fear that it could show something is just really helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously you want to say, well, I want to be holy and godly, and that's the best reason to not do it. But it's also helpful to have other reasons as well to keep you in the right way. So that's really helpful. A couple of years ago, really the biggest thing for me was I meet with a pastor friend every other week, and we have a list of like 10 accountability questions we ask each other every time, and like 4 of those has to do around sex and pornography and whatever, all these sort of things. Yeah. And what I've just found is that even if you do like a Covenant Eyes report, or if you have someone that's like, hey, if you ever look at something, or if ever anything comes up, let me know. What I found is after a while that doesn't really work because it gets kind of awkward if you haven't really talked much in a while, and then to send like some random text or some random email, like it's just weird.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have someone that you're proactively talking about these things with often, and it's not awkward, it's not weird because you're going to talk about them, and it's just a normal thing. So I found that to be the most helpful thing. And the third thing that's helpful, and this might not be a surprise, is as well as limiting social media scrolling times, it's just in general.
Yeah.
Because again, oftentimes, problems can arise not because you're seeking out something, but because you see something. And so there's various ways you could do that, whatever restrictions you have, but just trying to proactively think through what boundaries do I have in place to avoid this? Not like, oh, I'm good and I'm always going to be good, because that will get you into trouble.
And to make this like hyper practical for ministry, because obviously this is for anybody and everybody, but as we're talking about like church planting, there's it's inevitable that this conversation will come up with someone who you're pastoring, whether it's because of an issue they're having or because of they're looking for guidance or whatever. And I think we would all say that if we're talking to someone and they just said it's not a problem, and so I'm not doing anything, that we would say to them that's probably unwise. But to do that ourselves, obviously, we need to reflect what we're telling others. And so inevitably, as you're pastoring people, this topic is going to come up, and this is going to be a struggle for probably the vast majority of people that you end up pastoring. And so I find for this and for pretty much anything, the most helpful thing is to be able to say, this is what I'm doing, or this is what I've done, or these are the things that I've set up to help, rather than saying, well, I've beat this problem, and so here's my advice, even though I'm not actually taking it. It all is much more effective to come from a place of like real life experience, and this is what I'm actually doing. So this is the kind of thing where obviously this is good for everybody and anybody, but especially as you're pastoring, you need to have these things in place to be able to talk to other people, because it's going to seem really disingenuous if someone asks you and either you don't have an answer to this, or it seems like you never really thought about it, or you just kind of act like this is a thing of the past. Because I don't know about you, but even if it is a thing of the past, whenever anyone tells me it's a thing of the past, I always assume that they're probably not being super honest, even though for some people it truly can be a thing of the past. But just to not even be thinking about it anymore is just like recipe for disaster. And even if it's not an issue that's reared its head in a long time, that's like the prime way that it's going to come back is just to relax on it and assume that you've got it conquered forever.
Yeah, one of the things in ministry, it's really important to be able to lead with integrity.
Yep.
And not that you have to be going to be perfect all the times and all places, and that's not what I'm trying to say, but this is a big issue in our culture today. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about porn and sex in a couple weeks in a sermon, and so I was looking up all these stats, and there's lots of stats and a lot of stuff. A lot of people are looking at it, whatever. And it was frustrating because I was trying to find like sources for these, not just random ones. But one of the things I did find was that I forget who it was now, but it was 1 in 5 youth pastors and 1 in 5 senior pastors have looked at porn, at least like within the past month.
Yeah.
Which tends to tell me too that's probably higher because self-reporting a negative behavior, like we just don't like to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, do you have things in place that you can? We talk about this when it comes to generosity too on various podcast episodes about like if you're not being generous, then it's really hard for you to convictionally talk about the importance of generosity. And I think this is also one of those areas that if you don't have things in place that you can walk through, like, here's what I do, or here's my story, and here's how that's a really big deal. And so if you want to lead your church and your people and wherever God has you with character and integrity, you have to have proactive boundaries, not reactive every time you do something you feel full of shame and regret, and it's a repeated pattern because you don't have things in place. So just like the alcoholic doesn't go to the bar, that's what wisdom looks like. And so if you want to have a faithful ministry, that's one of those things, proactive boundaries around porn and inappropriate viewing of whatever that might look like for you.
Yeah, and I mean, the fact of the matter is, obviously, there's forgiveness for everybody, and like it doesn't mean that people, like you said, it doesn't mean you're going to be perfect forever, but to have things in place and to I don't like the word make a mistake because it's a conscious decision, but like to make a mistake or to make the decision to do it here and there I think is much different than just to say nothing is set up and so I just hope it doesn't happen, but it does. But rather than, something that's set up and then if you were to stumble or make a mistake, you have someone to talk to and you have someone to go to and to kind of confess to. I think it's a lot different than just to say I've got it conquered and I've got it handled, but then to continually go back to it and continually feed this habit.
So that's number one. Number two, social media. Now this one, what's interesting is this one and the next one, a lot of our I'm busy is really I look at my phone all the time. Mm-hmm. That's really what it is, if we're being honest. And because, again, we don't have any proactive, here's what I'm going to do. And this really struck me a couple weeks ago when I was on vacation. We were at the beach for a couple, 5 or 6 days. And I bought a book. I was reading, this biography on the Wright brothers, and I deleted some social media stuff off my phone. I just wasn't on it very much, and I read this book, and then I almost finished another book, and it was a lot of reading. And part of it was because I was struck by two things. One, the two biographies I read were people who didn't have use technology very often. Obviously, the Wright brothers were early 1900s,
Didn't
so
have a choice.
Didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
But it's like how much more people got done without all the stuff we have today, and it's because they like didn't waste so much time. Now, I'm not against relax. Like I'm not one of those people. Like imagine if you never played video games in your life, or you never looked at social media. How much? It's like nobody's going to work 20. Like you need to have.
Yeah.
So I'm good with that. But it was interesting to me that really stood out was not so much like for me at least the amount of time I spent on social media, but the quantity. So every time you pull out your phone for like a few seconds, it turns into 5 minutes. And I wasn't doing that at all. Every time I was like sitting around, I just pulled out a book. And I know that like during the normal life, it's not always that easy and that practical. But I was like, man, this is crazy. And so like one of the things I changed for me, at least a couple weeks ago, was I started turning off my phone. I kind of did this off and on or like put it away, but I actually like turn it off around 9 o'clock every night. And I don't turn it on until I leave the house the next morning. And I know it's all like, well, what about emergencies? I can only speak from my experience. I have never been called once in 5.5 years in the middle of the night from someone at church. Now, that might happen at some point.
Yeah.
But I would just say this. Why would we live our life around the 0.1% possibility and not the 99% possibility? And so having my phone off means like, like an hour, 90 minutes before bed, I'm reading or I'm doing something that's like worth my time, not scrolling on Twitter, reading news articles that it's like, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
So again, this is not like this is what you have to do, but you have to think through things in your life of like, so like some of the practices for me is like, I don't look at social media at all until lunch. Just because even if it's quick in the morning, my mind starts thinking, or if I like take a quick break during my workday, it's just like focus. There's a lot of stuff, we won't get into it now, but like on focus and all these sort of things. It's like it doesn't matter. There's other ways that you can take a break without getting sucked in. And so again, if you feel busy, like you've got too much going on, if you sermon prep, for example, if that's a struggle for you in terms of like getting it down in a reasonable time, my guessing is the phone and social media is part of that problem.
Yeah.
And so you need to be proactive boundaries of when I'm going to use it and when am I not going to use it. So it's really easy for you to say like yes and no, and not just anytime I'm sitting around, I guess I'll just pull up my phone.
Yeah, this is I don't know. This is like one that's always been a struggle, not to put in place, but like how far to make these boundaries, I guess you could say. Because like everyone knows, and I know, and everyone listening knows, like social media, there's great things about it, but there's like super awful, detrimental things about it too that like are just killing us all, honestly. Like, let's be honest. But it's also, great and addicting. And so what are you going to do about it? But like how far to take this, it's always been something that's struggled with me. There's been times where it's just like get rid of all of it altogether. And then there's obviously things for work that we do with it and things like that. And so we get it back, and then it's like, get it back. And then why don't you just use as much as you want? And then who cares? And then it's like, no, I'll just get rid of it altogether. But it's like this vicious cycle. And obviously we know like it's built this way. Like all these changes that Facebook announced they're doing, I don't think they've implemented them yet. I forget when they're coming out, but that are basically meant to, they're like, what are they changing it? They're changing it so you see more like content creators versus people that you know, which is to make it so you'll stick on it more. Like there's no like secret about what's going on. It's to make it's designed. So like if you don't have anything in place, or if you just kind of, it's kind of like the last one. If you just kind of do it on your own, and I'll try and limit it as much as possible. There's like billions of dollars working against you to make it so that you're going to fail at that. And so you have to put something in place, or else it's just you're going to fail. And it's not like a sheer like force of will thing. It's just like we're human, and these are addicting things. And so whatever that looks like, whether that's just getting rid of it altogether, I think sometimes that can be like, oh, that's too crazy. And I don't mean like deleting accounts, but I mean like deleting it off a phone. But I think the very first thing is like getting rid of notifications. I feel like is a very easy first step. And I don't know about like maybe if you run a social media business, it's a different story, which I don't. But like I can't think of any emergency that I need like a Facebook notification that someone commented on something or whatever. But it's anything, like any little ding that pops up. We all know this. You have to click it. You have to do something with it. And so any little step like that helps. But yeah, limiting time on it. Obviously, phones now, you can actually go in and physically limit the time it allows you to be on it, and have to like put in a password to go beyond that. So that might be an option for some. But whatever it is to limit social media time, because it'll just there's no such thing as a minute on it. It seems like a minute, but then you go back and look at screen time reports, and it's the most depressing thing ever.
So so social media, maybe a better category for this is just phone usage overall. For maybe it's not social media for you, maybe it's games on your phone or news or whatever. No, these things are not bad. But if you're more proactive about when you're going to use them, when you're not going to use them, you're going to feel way less busy because your time isn't being wasted so frequently, or your mind focus isn't also being scattered, because every time you take a 2-minute break, you're scrolling, and then you have to refocus your mind. It gets really hard. So those would be really helpful for ministry. Number 3 is reading. Now, this is a positive.
Yes.
not a negative.
Yep.
But I get people can read at different speeds, so I get that. And people might be more inquisitive, which means they might read more than others. So I get
Sure.
that too.
Yeah.
Like some people just don't care. But particularly in ministry, if you're trying to lead people and trying to learn, different aspects of life and trying to improve and all sort of things, like this is important. And you don't read like it's not. Some people, it's not that some people are good at reading and some people are bad at reading. Now there might be dyslexia. There's reasons.
Yeah, of
Obviously,
course,
there's
yeah.
legit reasons for it. But there's audiobooks and things like that too nowadays. But if you want to read more, you have to like practically put it on your schedule, like calendar it, and maybe even do it during the day. Like one of the things I tell pastors sometimes, you feel kind of guilty, like you got to do all your normal work from like 9 to 5 and then do the extra stuff whatever. It's like, no, you can put 30 minutes a day on your calendar to read. And it doesn't necessarily have to be ministry. It could be a biography. It could be business. It could be something else, even outside of church stuff, which is totally fine too, because it gives you a broader perspective on things. But you have to be learning and growing and not just not doing these things. And reading is important. And so I would encourage, if you're in ministry, again, it's easy for me to see because I like reading, so I get that. I'm not saying you need to read all the time, every single day. But if you put it on your calendar, you will do it. And you can go from reading like 2 books a year to even 10 books a year. It's really not as hard as you think, or reading like 10 or 20 pages a day. Like, take 10 minutes less on your phone and put that towards there. You can read a lot more than you think in a lot shorter increments if you just commit to it doing consistently. And I think in ministry it's really important to grow and expand our horizons, if you will.
Yes.
And so you're not going to read. I think it's just really too easy to assume that the people read a lot. They just do it. And I think you find a lot of people that read a lot actually have put it in their calendar to do it, which is why it happens.
And I think maybe you'll get to the point where it's just something that you do because you want to, but you have to take that step to actually get there. And so especially like in a previous before church world, I always wanted to read a lot, but I always struggled with the time, which was my own fault. But the one thing that you just said, but I was told by someone even outside of the church, is just put it in your calendar, put it in your schedule to read 10 pages every day. 10 pages every day, and you'll read a 300-page book a month. And at the time, I was like, I had this, all these books I wanted to read, and I was like, wow, that's way more manageable than just looking at them and saying like, oh, I need to tackle all these because everyone else in my industry just reads like a ton, and so I need to catch up because everyone brags about how much they read, and like, who cares? You don't got to compare yourself to anyone else. You don't got to post on social media how many books you read. Like, just read at your own pace, and it's fine if it takes a couple months to finish a book as long as you're doing it and like working towards it. But scheduling time to read or figuring out like a time in your day that you're going to like dedicate to that. And it goes back with the last one, that you dedicate to that without a phone being kind of next to you or in front of it, because it's so easy, especially until you get into that habit to be reading, to get distracted, to forget what you're reading. And I don't know if this is the case for everyone, but for me, especially when I really wanted to like start reading really heavily, I felt like kind of had that thought of like everything I read, I have to internalize enough that I could like write a book report on, which isn't the case. Like nobody's grilling you on what you read, just read. And if you don't understand it, you can go back and reread. And if you feel like it's not worth reading, then abandon the book and read something else. Like I feel like sometimes we put all these guidelines around what we need to read, especially as like ministry or pastors, but just read and you'll get more comfortable with it as you go on. And you'll find kind of what you like and what you're more comfortable reading and what you kind of need to read to kind of stretch yourself. And it's just an ongoing thing, but it just starts with doing something. And it's fine if that something isn't this big, 600-page or 800-page book on theology. It's okay if it's something short and something that's simpler. It just kind of gets you in the habit.
Yeah, and speaking of, all of us growing in this, one of the things that I'm really bad at is quitting books that are really bad. It's really hard for me to do it.
I'm good at that one.
And then what happens is it takes me forever to finish it because I'm like, I'm reading it slower. I'm like, this is dumb. I just finished a book that was like this. I should have quit it halfway through. But I was like, I don't know why. I just can't. But I also would say this too. If you're someone who preaches regularly or creates any sort of biblical content for whatever your job is at your church, I would encourage you to say like, not to count that. Like if I'm studying for a sermon, obviously I'm doing a lot of reading, but like just reading stuff for the Bible or reading stuff to preach it is different than just learning in general. So I would encourage you I do that anyway, like to maybe not consider that accounting.
And I'd also add to read for entertainment. And whatever that looks like for you, whether that's fiction, nonfiction, maybe everything church related entertains you and nothing else does. But like read something that's just that you enjoy, not just something that you're trying to get like nuggets of wisdom from to pass on to somebody else. Like I think doing all that's fine, and obviously all that stuff's important, but I think finding something that you really enjoy reading is really the key to kind of really getting into reading heavily, because you actually look forward to it and not feel like it's a chore.
So that's number 3. Number 4, to be proactive about is time off or time away. And so again, it is hard, and I'm sympathetic to smaller churches, not a lot of staff, whatever. It's really hard. But I also found that if you just plan it and do it, you will then figure out solutions, and people will be willing to help you. And so, if you're never, I mean, it's just it's hard for none of this is like blanket statements because every situation's unique, and I know there's exceptions, whatever. But if I've talked to guys who are like, yeah, I preach 50 weeks out of a year. But I also say, like, if you're at a spot where you're preaching that often, the church is probably not in a good place or a healthy place. Like, that's just not. I don't know. That's a lot. And so I think, and I've also found too, when it is harder, if you don't have a lot of staff or there's ministry demands of life, whatever, where it is harder to do that. If you plan it out proactively, then you'll actually do it. So if you plan out like 3 or 4 months in advance, and you're like, well, I'm not exactly sure who's going to preach or how I'm going to get this covered. But if you do it and you already go ahead and like pay for the hotel or whatever, you will figure it out.
Yeah.
Whether it's just like, well, we want to take some time, but I'm not really quite sure. And there's not this pressure of like, I have to do it, then it won't happen. And so I would encourage you to not just like wait, like, oh, I guess in 2 weeks we'll take some, like try a couple of months ahead of time, plan for a few days or whatever you're going to do, because then it will force you to actually do it as opposed to, well, I think sometime in 2 months from now we'll take a few days off. But I'm not exactly sure, and then you kind of forget about it, and it gets closer, and then nothing happens. You have to be proactive about this, not reactive about this. And so, yeah, I would recommend doing it a few months ahead of time, and you will find a solution rather than, I think I got to do it, and then it never happens.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, we're much more urgent to figure out a way to do something if there's a need to do it. So if you book something, there's a need to get it covered because you're probably not making a ton of money as a church plant pastor, and so you don't want to waste that, obviously. And so book something ahead of time, and that'll give you the urgency to get it covered. And that's why we talk about often having relationships with other churches, other pastors. You may not have someone in your church that can preach, which is fine. Hopefully that's something that you're working towards. But if you have relationships with other churches in the area, everybody has someone who every church that's been around for a little bit has someone that wants more opportunities to preach that isn't getting it. And they might not be the perfect person in the world, but you can start cultivating those relationships and get somebody that can come in that's halfway decent that can help fill in for you to give you a break, because it's obviously you need breaks, but also it's helpful for people to hear other voices now and again. Yeah. And if it's just you 50 weeks a year or whatever, then people are only hearing you. They're not hearing any other voices. And it's not even that people have different opinions or viewpoints than you. It's just it helps to change things up now and again. So start building those relationships, and it'll make those weeks that you need to cover a lot easier to cover if you actually have people to go to.
Yeah, so proactive time away is important. You got to get out of the mindset of I can't do this and just making yourself do it, and you'll be surprised that it'll actually get covered.
Yeah.
But never doing it and being burned out 2 years from now isn't healthy. Whereas getting someone to maybe preach, for example, who's maybe not the best, but it's 1 week and you need it, you'll be okay.
Exactly.
So you need to be proactive about that, not just assume it's going to happen. Number 5 is really, really spiritual answer here. Is prayer.
Yes.
I just want to say this. I get people, how do I say this? When people say I'm not good at prayer, that's not a thing. Mm-hmm. That's not like, it's not a talent that you get. I don't get frustrated when people like at church, whatever, say that's fine. Mm-hmm. When people in ministry say it, I'm just like, it's not, you don't, like that, you either do it or you don't do it. Yeah. It's not like the quality, I don't even think the quality matters so much as whether or not you're actually doing it. And so again, just assuming, well, I need to pray, but then not doing it, not even doing it, let alone like doing it if you consider it well or not. But I'm doing that's a problem. And so there needs to be things in place that proactively encourage you to do it. And whether or not the quality is amazing, the fact that you're doing is what's important. And so I've done various things. Like right now, I have got a stack of cards, like I don't know, whatever size. Note cards. There you go. Of like people at our church, and I add things and I email people updates, whatever. But the nice thing is that like I pray like 5 to 7 of them a day, and whether I spend a lot of time on them or not, whether my prayers are amazing or not, like it gives me one of the disciplines to do it and to pray. And so I'm not just sitting there wondering like, well, I guess I'll pray about this today or whatever. So that's what we're talking about. We're not also talking about like praying 2 hours a day. You don't have to do that. We're just assuming, well, I pray when I think about it. Or pray, like that's not, in ministry, again, we want to lead with integrity and character here. We need to have times and calendars or whatever in our life that encourage us to do it. And I would just say, I know there's exceptions, so this is not like, you don't have to do this. But in my experience, people that have nothing other than I'm just going to pray typically would say that they're not, quote unquote, good at praying. But if they had a list written down somewhere or they had some sort of way that they pray through things systematically, they're much more likely to do it. And we might say, well, that doesn't seem as spiritual. Spiritual is like maybe not having it, but if you're not praying at all, then that's the lesser thing there. So when it comes to prayer, it can't just be something that you should do. There's no such thing about as being bad at it. It's not a talent that you acquire or that you're born with. It's a skill that you develop. And so having things in your life that actually force you to pray, for lack of a better word, will actually make you do it.
And I think, I mean, maybe you have like the greatest memory on the planet, but I do not. And if I tell someone I'm going to pray for something, I want to do it. And like, I don't want to, because I feel like I'm lying to someone if I say I'm going to and don't. And there's a lot of instances where we say you're going to pray for somebody. And so there needs to be some sort of system of writing it down or journaling it somewhere or something so that you can remember to do that. Because like, I don't know. I'm never going to sit and, okay, it's time to pray. And now over the past month, here's all the times I said I'm going to pray for this, and now I'm going to do it. But that's just not going to happen.
Yep.
And I mean, I get people are people, and it's not like it's not like God's mad at you if you say that and that you accidentally forget to write it down or something. But like, there needs to be some sort of system or something in place that you can remember these things that you tell people you're going to pray through. And for me, this was especially tough, especially when first kind of getting into ministry more, because everybody knows those people who are like champion prayers, like Olympic prayers. And we're not talking about like publicly praying here. This is more like private. But even that, like if that's not really like your personality or not where you at, that can even still feel intimidating. Like even if I'm alone, I don't pray like any of these people do. And I don't have like this, I'm not like quoting Psalms as I pray, as some people do. I just feel like I'm sometimes like, especially early on, I was like, I just feel like I'm complaining all the time. And so I'd feel guilty sometimes about praying. And like, I grew up with a stutter. And so sometimes like trying to be more eloquent was really tough for me and stuff like that. And I felt like even if I was alone, that God was like judging my prayer and things like that, which obviously we know isn't true, but just these thoughts that get in your head. But when you just start doing things, it's like the reading one and all the other ones. When you just start doing something, you eventually kind of get over some of these things.
Yep. That
when I just was like, you know what, I'm just going to pray, and whatever God wants to do with it, just do with it. And so like sometimes it's repetitive and rambling and whatever. But when I kind of started to get out of my own head and just said like, God just wants to hear me pray, and so let's just do it. It was much easier to make it a habit than when I was all in my head about it. And so make a list or do whatever you need to remember the things to pray about, and then just figure out a time and schedule it and just do it. And don't worry about anything else. Just do it. And that skill, if you even want to call it that, which is a weird word, but develops over time and you get more comfortable with it, but it's never going to happen unless you actually start doing it.
Yeah, so when it comes to prayer, I think the practical thing here is to think of one step you could take.
Yeah.
So you're not going from 0 to 2 hours a day. And I've tried phone apps and stuff. Now I use these little note cards, even though it's a little more inconvenient because I have to like bring them back and forth or whatever. Or like if I'm praying, I have to like write a sticky note to follow, and I'll follow with them later because I just like being on my phone. I don't like it. Yeah. Whether it's making a list of people, maybe making a list of 10 things just for yourself and just spend. My very non-spiritual approach to praying, but if you actually do it, that's actually more spiritual, is like pray for it till your mind wanders. So if that's 30 seconds, if you got a list of 10 things and that's 30 seconds and you start thinking of something else, you go to the next one. It takes you 3 minutes, but you prayed for 10 things. That's important. It doesn't matter that it's not perfect. And so thinking about something to actually make you pray as opposed to just feeling guilty about it.
Yeah, and to add to that, there are a lot of apps that help with this. And I think that can be fine if that's something that you can handle. For me, I tried, like there's Echo is like a big one that I always remember hearing about, and it's good. Like the interface is really good, and I liked it. But I'm on my phone, and I felt like it was hard not to get distracted with anything else. And like you can set up to like send you notifications to pray, but they always came at like really inopportune times, and so I'd feel like guilty about it. But so I'm not saying it can't work for anybody, but I would encourage you to try and think of something that's not technology related, so you don't have the temptation to pull something out.
Yep. So there you go, prayer. Number 6 to be proactive about is time with your spouse.
Yep.
Now, I think one of the things that's hard is sometimes you hear what other people do, and then you feel really guilty if you don't do what they're doing. So I just want to say there's not a right or wrong way of doing this, and it looks different for anybody. Age of kids, again, this is assuming you're married. Age of kids, no kids, season of life, what you've got going on. So it's not about like fitting a certain mold, but being proactive and putting it on your calendar in some way so that it happens, so that you actually have a healthy marriage and healthy family to keep going. So like, for example, some people talk about like having a date night with their spouse every single week. And that might feel really overwhelming for you. I don't do that. That's not practical for Christine and I at this time and our life. And that's totally fine. There's different things that we do to be proactive about it, and we put it on our calendar to make it happen. And so when we talk about like time with your spouse, I would encourage you not to be discouraged when you hear other people saying how they do it. And maybe you've got a kid with special needs, or it's just like, I can't do that. The question is not trying to fit someone else's mold. It's just about what would it look like for us to do it, and also to do it like in a real way. So not like we eat breakfast every morning together, but our kids are running around trying to get them ready for school. Like that's not a thing. I mean, that's the thing, and maybe that's where you are for now though.
Right.
Maybe you got to start there, but trying to maybe spend less time on the phone or after kids go to bed, whatever it might look like. But trying to proactively put on your calendar that we're going to spend time together to do something. And maybe you're in a season where you can't do the date nights really at all for a night now. What would it look like maybe once every other week or once a week after the kids go to bed? Watching Netflix doesn't count, but doing something else. I don't know, but proactive time with your spouse so that you guys are healthy is really important, as opposed to 6 months down the line, a year down the line. There's a lot of problems that would have been avoided if there was more intentional. Again, it's like prayer, it's like reading. It's like we know we should do these things, but we get so busy planning it. Busy, and I hate that word. It's a bad word. But yeah, it's a curse word in my mind. Yeah, busy. There you go. Doing all these other things that we haven't practically planned ahead of time. When, again, just like going on vacation, if you put it in your calendar first, it will happen. So I have on my to-do list is what I use for my task manager or whatever. On the first of every month, I have a reminder of a list of things to put on my calendar. So it's like dates with my kids. So we do one a month with each of them individually. Christine and I have 2 date nights a month. I have like this prayer stuff, whatever. On the first of the month, I put it in my calendar, like on those specific times and days. And then what do you know? It happens, and I'm not stressed out about other things because I've built everything around that. So that might be a really practical way to do it. And even with your spouse, like on the first of the month, sitting down and picking those times, but being proactive about it. Otherwise, it won't happen.
Yeah, and I think kind of like we were talking about before, you don't have to go from 0 to 100 with this. Like, what's the first step that you can do to increase your time with your spouse? So if you're someone who is working super long hours, I mean, hopefully in ministry, if you're in ministry, then we've obviously talked about that a lot. But if you're bivocational or something like that, like if you work super long hours and you hardly see each other, the first step probably isn't, all right, we need to get date night every single week. We need to do this every single week. It's not. It's probably not just lining up all this stuff because you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. But it's what's the first thing we can do, and then once we kind of have that set in stone, then what's the next thing we can do to constantly be increasing and constantly be working on this. But it's so easy to look at people who like. I mean, no one knows everyone's personal life, but who seem on the surface to like have it all together and they have like a million things planned together, to look at that and be like, dude, I don't know how I'm going to go from like we see each other hardly ever to now go to like all these things all at once, and it just doesn't seem possible, and so you don't even try. But to just figure out one thing. And so one thing that I found helpful is, like you said, putting date nights on the calendar, but also the realization that date night doesn't have to be a ton of money. It doesn't have to be something that is this huge undertaking. Like, just for example, this is my wife did this, not me, but it was last month.
Did she do it with you, hopefully?
Yeah, she did.
Good.
Yeah. But I don't even know if I guess I knew it was happening, but like it was at home, and it was after the kids went to bed, and it was like she got from I don't know, like one of these like TJ Maxx or something, like one of these cheaper stores. Like it was on clearance. It was a pack of movie trivia cards, not like horror movies, and it's all on like horror movie trivia. And she kept saying, she told me, she was like, she picked something up for us to do that night, but she wouldn't tell me what it was. And it cost like, I think it was like $2 or $3. And we played, and it was like a few hours, and it was like stupid. Who cares? But it was a ton of fun. And that's something like I'll remember for a while, because obviously it was thoughtful, and it was, she did it for me. It's like something I did for her, but it's something that I had an interest in that she was fine with, but didn't care that much about. But it was a lot of fun, and we like made dinner with food that we had in the house. It wasn't like, so it was like this super cheap thing that was a lot of fun and something memorable that we spent time together that wasn't just like sitting and watching TV.
Yep.
And it can be like super simple things like that. It doesn't need to be this huge undertaking, which sometimes when we talk about date nights, it can feel like, okay, I got to pay for a babysitter, which is good to do sometimes. I'm not saying don't, but like, got to pay for a babysitter. We got to pay to go somewhere nice, somewhere to eat, which is expensive and nice. We got to do all these things. And it's like, we're on a tight budget. I don't know how this is ever going to happen. We're going to have to coordinate all these things to make it happen, which sometimes you should coordinate all those things to make it happen. Those aren't bad things, but it doesn't mean that has to be the exact way you do it every single time. And there can be cheap and easy ways to do these things if you're actually proactive and think about it.
Yeah, and the nice thing about boundaries is like when you don't do them, or if you cross a boundary, it doesn't necessarily mean you've done something wrong.
Yeah.
But it does like make you think, well, I've got to fix this. So like even like, boundaries around phone or social media. Like, there's nothing wrong with spending time on your phone, but it's like, oh, I'm spending more time. Like, you consciously begin to develop, I can't do this, so I shouldn't do this. And so, like, time with your spouse, one of the ways this is helpful, like, if you're proactive about it, like beginning of the month, for example, and something gets moved, well, it's like, well, I know I need to put it back on the calendar. Or another way this happens, because sometimes in ministry, things do come up, somebody needs to be met with, or somebody quits, so whatever.
Yeah.
It makes it a lot easier for your spouse, like if you're the one on staff and your spouse isn't, for them to be understanding and okay with these last minute changes because they know that this has been a priority. Not like, hey, we're going to try to have a date this month.
Yeah.
And the date night comes and like 2 days beforehand something happens and you can't do it anymore. Well, of course that's going to cause problems because you wanted to do something, but you didn't like say this is like, you haven't communicated this is the expectation and then it doesn't happen and then you're just on to the next month. Yep. Whereas like, Christina and I, for example, we do two date nights a month that's what we do. Now, sometimes something comes up, and so we got to move it for a week or whatever. Or let's say 1 month, it only happens like once that month. Like we know, like this is a problem. Next month we are having 2 date nights. Like it just because it's been a communicated boundary or expectation. When it doesn't happen, you know it's going to be fixed. And so when things do come up last minute, it's not a big deal for me or for her because we know that like time together still is going to happen because we've talked about it.
Yep.
So that can help with that. So that's number 6, and then number 7, last but certainly not least. If you're a fan of this podcast, one of my pet projects. That's not a thing. I don't know why I call it that.
Sure it is, right?
Pet desires. Pet.
That sounds weirder.
I don't know. One of the things I talk about a lot.
Yeah, there you go.
Email.
Passions.
That's what I meant. Passions. Pet passions is email. Now, again, part of this goes around with like the productivity focused stuff, even with social media, is we're really busy because we spend so much time on email. I love by Cal Newport, A World Without Email, came out with a year or two ago. It's really good. The book is, by the way, it's not about never email people. That's not what it's about. He talks about where it comes from, why we're way less productive now than we were like even 30 to 40 years ago before email happened. Like it's just the opposite of what you would think. But again, one of the problems with email is it feels very productive and it feels very easy. So if you're stuck on something, sermon prep, something that's like you just don't want to do or whatever, it's like, well, I'll just do this for a few minutes. And not only does it shift your focus and attention, which takes a long time to get back to the project you're on, but it makes you feel like you've done things when you haven't. Yep. And so what I found for people that are bad with their email, again, especially in ministry, like there's no such thing as good and bad with email. I get some people are a little bit more organized than others, but this is one of those things where you have to figure out a way to stay on top of it because email comes from people, and if you're in ministry, your job is to help people. Yep. So this whole like, especially if you're a smaller church, like it just, and then it feeds into like the pastor's always busy syndrome. People don't feel cared for. You got to have a way to stay on top of it. One of the ways you can stay on top of it though is like when I first started doing like Inbox Zero, which I know is not for everybody. I'm not saying we actually have an episode on it. I don't know what it was because right before we started recording, I added email to this and I didn't look it up. So we have an episode on how to get to Inbox Zero. I'm not saying that you have to do that, but when I a couple years ago when I tried to get more proactive about it, I checked my email less. And I didn't use my email as a task list, which is a whole other thing. But I also like when I did check my email, I was like, oh, I'm going to deal with everything in my email. I'm not going to check it randomly, or if I'm checking it, it's going to be dealt with. And so what I would do is I would respond to anything like 2 minutes or less. Getting Things Done by David something, I forget his name. He talks about this. If it's 2 minutes or less, you have to deal with it. You might not want to deal with it, but you need to deal with it. And if not, what I do is I archive the email and on my to-do list on my task manager, I like put a thing in there so like I can get back to it later, but it's not in my email. But anyway, if you check your email less, you'll email people less, which means you'll get less email. Yeah. And if you actually schedule, here's what I would do if email is a problem for you. I would schedule in your day 2 or 3 times a day, and that's it. Of like give yourself like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, so that you're actually working on it. And then when you're not working on it, you're not checking it. But that way you can stay on top of it. When I'm working on email, like it's a task item. It's not something I do for 2 minutes that turns into 10 minutes. Yep. And then when I'm done with it. And then when I go back to it, I'm going to do it again. That way people aren't followed up with, because what happens so often is somebody, we all know this, right? We get an email, we don't want to really know what to say, so like I'll do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow turns into the next day, and then it's the weekend, and then it's a week later, and you're like, well, it's been a while, whatever. Meanwhile, that person feels completely ignored. Yeah. In our mind, we're justifying it, and we know like our intentions were good, but in their mind, it's like, well, they just didn't respond to me, and it becomes a problem. And so I would recommend proactive times to check your email if it's a problem, and then to not check it if you're not checking it. I would recommend taking it off your phone. Take a lot of things off your phone. Yeah. And I'd also say this, because for example, one of those things for me too is typically, unless I have things scheduled in there, I don't check my email until around lunchtime. But sometimes you have to check your email to find something. So I have a search tab in my browser. Like we use Gmail for our church stuff, and it's like there is no email that matches this query or something like that. And that's the search that's saved. And so when I click on it, it searches my inbox, and there's nothing there.
Yeah.
So then I can use the search bar to find the email I want. Now, granted, it tells me how many unopened emails I have, but you always have unopened emails, so that's not a problem. But instead of opening your email and trying to find, and then you see all the new ones that have come in or the ones you haven't dealt with, I hope that makes sense. I have a tab saved for a search that no emails match.
Yeah.
So that if I have to check my email at a time that I don't want to work on email, I can do it without getting stuck in it. All that to say is a long-winded answer. You can't just be like, I'll just check it, because that becomes a problem. I would recommend, if it's a problem for you, being very proactive of when you check it and when you don't.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add, but the easiest or the most effective thing to me is just put it on your calendar of a block or 2 blocks, whatever you need, of emails, and that's when you check it. And otherwise, close the tab, like don't have it open in the background or on the side, and just check emails then. And most of us probably aren't inundated with so many emails that needed a response, like legitimate real emails, that you can't handle them in 1 to 2 blocks in a day. Like you're probably not getting so many that you need to be like 3 or 4 times a day. And if you put those blocks and that's what you work on, get through them, and then you don't check it again until the next day, that's less than 24 hours that someone has to go unresponded to, which is fine. And then you can address it the next day. And so that's what I found to be the most helpful, is just put it on your calendar. That's when you check it. And outside of that, you kind of ignore it. But it's not actually ignoring it, because you know that there's a time you're going to get to it.
Here's the thing. Email is invited interruption. That's all it is. And if you're trying to do something and every 5 minutes someone tries to talk to you, like, you would get really frustrated with that. Yep, that's what we do with email. We invite people to interrupt us. And it's okay not to respond right away. Nobody cares. And nobody needs to have access to you that much anyway. Again, as long as you respond within 24 hours, which is our rule here at New City, unless it's like the weekend or you're out of town or something,
Right.
like, they'll hear from you. It might be a little bit slower, but you can actually get things done that matter. And so be proactive about email, not just, again, I think it's a big problem for busyness, quote unquote, for a lot of people, is like, this contributes to it. I check it all the time. It's on my phone, so I'm just sitting there at night. I got nothing to do. It's hard, like, especially if it's on your phone, like you have the app on your phone, it's hard not to. Like, you're just sitting around, and then it just becomes a thing, and then you send some emails that you might not have sent till the next day, so then you got more emails, like, it's just a lot.
Yep.
And so being proactive about email. We've got various episodes on email. Unfortunately, I didn't look it up before we started the episode.
Search email, and I
if you
bet
search-
a lot of will come up probably.
Or a easy way to search too is if, a lot of our episodes are on YouTube.
Yep.
So you could literally go to our Practical Church Planning YouTube page and just like inbox 0 or email, and episodes will come up.
Yep.
So you can find it there.
Exactly.
So those are 7 things in your life that need proactive boundaries, not reactive. And if you do that, you'll be in a much healthier place. So again, some other resources that are helpful. Again, our YouTube channel, just Practical Church Planning. We're on there. We're on Facebook. If you join the Practical Church Planning Facebook group, as always, we do monitor what people post. And one of the things is there are no promotion or spam. So even if you have a really great resource, we don't allow people to post those, because then it becomes a spam wall. If somebody asks a question and your resource is helpful, you can comment in the back to them. But just a reminder, we don't allow people to post their own created content. And then last but not least, ambassadorsministries.com/practical. If you're looking for someone to help you at no cost to your church, support you as you grow your staff to do a lot of things you couldn't do without them, check out ambassadorsministries.com/practical. And that's it for this week. We'll be with you next Wednesday on Practical Church Planting.